Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. On today's show, I am so excited to have a longtime friend and one of our nation's most prominent attorneys, president of the Pacific Justice Institute, Brad Dacus, with us. Brad has a Juris Doctor from the University of Texas School of Law, and he has a passionate dedication to constitutional rights. And because of that, he founded the Pacific Justice Institute, PJI, in 1997. I have personally gotten to watch PJI grow into one of the largest Christian nonprofit organizations since then. It offers free legal services to defend faith and family. Brad has made numerous and continues to make numerous appearances on a variety of media platforms like Fox News, The Epoch Times, Good Morning America, and even Tucker Carlson Tonight. Currently, Brad hosts PJI's newest TV show, Faith and Law, as well as Brad Dacus Live, which can be watched Monday through Thursday on hischannel.com. It reaches over 1,000 radio stations also. Brad shares his legal wisdom on a show called The Dacus Report and delivers succinct legal commentary on The Legal Edge, broadcasted on more than 800 radio stations weekly. Brad's incredible. He's testified before the U.S. House of Representatives in D.C. He's testified on several occasions before the California State Legislature. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think he took a case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Not a big deal. No big deal. He's also one of the main 4 partners in an effort called The Church Finds Its Voice, which empowers churches across America and provides legal resources to them. He's incredibly busy, is one of our most effective legal minds in the country. I'm so glad he's joining us today to talk about the basics of law, the Constitution, parental rights, and religious freedom. Welcome, Brad. I'm exhausted from reading your bio.
I've got a few more pages. I'll send them to you.
Email them over and I'll get to it.
Thank you. You're very gracious.
You're a legal rock star. I am glad to know you, and I'm sure glad that we've got you on the side of right and the side of our constitutional freedoms here in America. Tell our listeners a little bit about you and a little bit more about PJI.
Oh, certainly. I founded Pacific Justice Institute, as you said, in 1997. And since that time, we have catapulted just incredibly in terms of our number of cases we're handling. We have over 220 cases in active litigation. We have offices now in more than 30 states, coast to coast, from Miami to Boston, to Seattle, to Dallas, Chicago, Orange County, California, all over the country, Hawaii. We do our work completely without charge. And what makes us so unique is the fact that we don't just cherry pick a few high profile cases. No, our goal is to make sure that everyone gets help, that no one's left on the side of the road when it comes to the broad issues of religious freedom, parental rights against the government, or the sanctity of human life. We have a great team of attorneys who are doing just an absolutely fantastic job. And it's great to be a part of a ministry for such a time as this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so thankful for Pacific Justice Institute, especially in a time right now, too, when so many people need protections like this. You guys are offering it for free. So many resources. PJI.org has tremendous resources that we love to direct people to all the time for parents, for people of faith, and just really average everyday Americans who find themselves in a situation where their constitutional rights are being aggressed against. So I'm so glad to talk to you today. Now, I'm gonna task you with a difficult challenge because you have operated on some of the highest levels of the legal realm, right? But I want to bring it down. This is Politically Basic. I love to offer our listeners and our viewers just the basics of what we're talking about. So let's bring it all the way back to the beginning. I want to talk about the Constitution. What is our U.S. Constitution? How would you describe this governing document that we live from and work from every day?
Yeah, the Constitution of the United States is the highest law of the land. Some people say, well, no, the United Nations, that's the highest, or some international organization or treaty. No. Our Constitution is the highest law of the land. So that is why it is so important. But make no mistake, it's not just the highest law of the land because human beings said, well, we're going to just create all these rights and things. No, it's the highest law of the land, partly because our founding fathers included in it explained fundamental rights, which they acknowledged up front do not come from man, but from our creator, something that's above man, which is what gives the Constitution such not just legal staying power, but also principled staying power, because it's premised upon the fact that there is something above man, fundamental rights, fundamental laws of nature, if you will, that hold us all accountable, and they're encapsulated in the Constitution and spelled out very clearly.
Yeah, I encourage people all the time to read the Constitution. It's not very long, actually. It's kind of surprisingly short and succinct, but it's a really beautiful document. And did you know, I know that you know this, but for our audience, did you guys know that the average life of a nation's governing document or constitution is only 17 years? Isn't that wild? And we've had ours now in the United States for almost 250 years. It's still serving us really well. And, we hear sometimes about things being argued that are unconstitutional, right? Or people believe that things in our Constitution should be updated or made more current because we live in different times. But the reason that America has done so well and been so successful, not perfect, but been really successful, is because we have an outstanding Constitution from which all of our other laws and rights come from. So I love hearing you talk about that. And we're pretty darn lucky, don't you think, Brad, that we get to live in America and that we have had founding fathers who kept us in mind when they were writing this document, right? They didn't just say like, well, these are your rules. You have to do all of these things. It was like, let's build a nation where the citizens of the nation are gifted all of these rights and all of these abilities. So I think we win in terms of having the best Constitution out there, winning.
Right. It's proven itself very well, because it wasn't premised upon giving more power to whoever was in control and less power to others. I mean, it wasn't perfect, and it's been amended. But those principles are what guides the Constitution, that foundational principles, for example, that all men are created equal, we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. These concepts of that were spelled out in the Declaration of Independence and then brought over into the Constitution is so important. Now, I think people also need to recognize something else, and that is the Constitution can never be assumed. That is, it is only respected to the extent to which there are people, men and women, sitting on the Supreme Court in our federal courts that respect it. Unfortunately, we have had examples in our history where we've had people sitting on the Supreme Court that looked at it, read it, and said, you know what, we're just going to sort of change it. We're going to treat the Constitution, as a, quote, living and breathing document. Translation, we're going to treat it and change it without people amending it. We're just going to take control of it ourselves. And that's called judicial activism. We've seen a lot of that from the late 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Only recently do we really have a Supreme Court where the majority of it, 2-to-1 majority, actually believe what the Constitution says and what the Founding Fathers intended the Constitution to say, which is a actual strict construction of the language and what was its original intent. Those are the only two questions that need to be asked by a member of the Supreme Court in applying a law or a situation to the Constitution. That is, what does that language in the Constitution actually say, and what was the original intent? If there's any disagreement at all as to what it was intended, then what was the original intent? And when the Supreme Court stays in those boundaries, we have a very strong and powerful Constitution protecting us all.
Yeah, we've had a lot of action at the Supreme Court lately. And maybe because I'm not an attorney, it just seems like there are a lot of cases coming in front of the Supreme Court. But those positions, the position of Supreme Court justice, is a really critical one. Now, just for our audience, and you guys know this, but just to share again and reiterate the basics of what this is our highest court in the land, right? We have 9 Supreme Court justices. There are some efforts underway right now to change that number because depending on who is in power and who holds the position of president of the United States. Some folks would like to see there be additional Supreme Court justices, but we have 9. They are put forward by a president when there becomes an opening. Now, this is a position for life, right? So you are selected by a president and put forward, and then you are confirmed by the Senate, and this is your lifetime appointment to take these cases and hear them, and along with the other 8 justices, I guess interpret might be the right language, the law and the Constitution to the best of your ability. I mean, it's a really critical job. And what we saw in the last presidential administration was remarkable. President Trump, during the Trump-Pence administration, they had 3 Supreme Court justices confirmed to the court, and only 1 in this last presidential administration, which is even unusual in itself, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting time to be following along with what the court is doing. It's a 6-3 majority right now, which I think, if I can offer an opinion, would be why some people want to see it raised. I've heard they want it raised to 15, because we've got some really interesting cases going in front of the Supreme Court, talking about presidential immunity and who can be on a ballot, and of course the most talked about and most critical case of Roe v. Wade, and the Dobbs case being giving abortion rights or laws surrounding abortion back to the states. So there's a lot going on, and you've had tremendous experience with the Supreme Court, Brad. Why don't you tell us about that experience?
Oh, you bet. And it's so important that the Supreme Court, first off, that they stay where they are, because if it becomes the norm to just simply add people onto the Supreme Court, well, yeah, then the left may get it to 15 justices this go around, but then when the politics shifts to the conservatives, then they will add another 7 so that they get the majority of the Supreme Court. And pretty soon you have a court system, a Supreme Court that is really powerless. It's just merely the reflection of who happens to be occupying the White House and Congress. And that's not the purpose of the judicial branch. Mm-hmm. It's to keep it separate. And that's why we have to oppose adding on to the court. Now, we've had some great cases go to the Supreme Court before. One of them recently was dealing with the shutting down of churches and synagogues across the country, but specifically in blue states like California. So when other states, what I call the red states, the freedom-loving states, mm-hmm. said, okay, we're going to open up the restaurants, and with that, we'll let the churches open. But then at the same time, we had blue states like California under Gavin Newsom saying, yeah, we'll open up the restaurants, the strip bars, and pot shops, but we're going to still keep the churches closed and the synagogues closed. That was outrageous. It was clear violation of the First Amendment free exercise clause, as well as the right to assemble. We at Pacific Justice stepped in. We brought this case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, rapid fire in the Supreme Court with a 6-3 vote, Kyle, 6-3 in just 3 days, ordered Governor Gavin Newsom, open those churches now.
Yes.
And he did. And it sent shockwaves across the country.
Yeah, it was so good. And I mean, what an experience, and what a necessary case to bring before the Supreme Court, too. That sort of felt like, I think COVID felt like the Wild West of, unlawful or gray area enacting of our laws. And regular people felt like, what do we do about it? We're not sure. We're having our businesses shut down. We can't go to church. People are driving into the church parking lot and seeing police cars, and it was just such a confusing time. So thank you for the work that you did to protect our rights during that time and fight for the American people. I hope that we don't have to go through that again. And now you've set legal precedent for something like that too. So we are all extraordinarily grateful. There at PGI, you represent for free clients who have had to undergo fighting back when their rights have been unfairly aggressed upon or removed from them. One of those rights that you guys deal with a lot are parental rights. How would you describe what parental rights are?
Well, parents' rights or parental rights, that's something that's not given by man. That is given by the laws of nature and nature's God. So it's something just simply recognized by man. But parents, according to the Supreme Court, in some very important case law like Pierce versus Society of Sisters, Myers v. Nebraska, Wisconsin v. Yoder, this is case law about 100 years old. Okay, so it's been around a long time. The Supreme Court in those decisions held that parents have a fundamental right over the education of their children, over the moral and religious instruction of the children, over the health and welfare of the decision of their children. So parents have a very broad scope of rights over their children. And mind you, it's a right that demands the highest level of protection based on case law. So in order for government to challenge it, to do something that is in some way infringing upon parental rights, they can't just show a rational basis like, here's just some justification. No, they have to show it's a compelling state interest. And not only is what the government wants to do a compelling state interest like health and safety to save the life of a child, for example, but they also have to prove that what they're doing or what they're requiring is the most least restrictive means possible to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So it's the highest level of protection of scrutiny afforded under the Constitution as when it comes to parental rights and their fundamental right over their children. That's why we at Pacific Justice Institute take it so seriously and have seen such great success defending the rights of parents when the government does hideous, unbelievable things. And unfortunately, those hideous things have been growing all the more throughout this presidential administration, regretfully.
Yeah, they have. That's been the trend. And I'm glad you guys are having success, as you should. But I think that you just made a really interesting point. I want to touch on it quickly, that when government gets involved in a parental rights issue, what you just said was so fascinating. And I actually don't think a lot of people quite understand this. And the reason that we don't understand it is because it doesn't seem like that's the right way, not the right way. It doesn't seem like that's what's happening or the response that we get from government or a government agency. But what you said was when they get involved, it should be the least amount of involvement possible to preserve parental rights. I think that line is getting crossed so frequently and to such a degree now that people are actually confused about it. You guys have had cases too, and you can speak to this better than I can, but we've talked about them several times. Cases, PJI cases of foster parents who have been told they cannot maybe practice their Christian faith in their home or speak about their Christian faith in a home. And so a foster child is being removed from a healthy, loving home that has already been deemed is a good place for this foster child to be placed. They're being removed and put back into a group home or another situation because of an infringement on a family's religious freedom. And it's kind of this mix of religious freedom and parental rights there. But I just think people are getting confused. And I want you to reiterate this statement is that as parents, we have the authority to raise our children. And it's been really shocking to see that line get pushed over the years.
Yeah, in the state of Oregon, for example, we have a real important lawsuit taking place there where parents are being completely prevented from being foster parents or even adopting through the state if they are sincere Christians. That is, they believe what Christianity teaches. That is, they're not willing to encourage gender identity dysphoria or confusion on a child. I have a hard time seeing how anyone with a conscience would ever want to encourage confusion when a child is very fluid, especially in early adolescence, with regards to issues of gender identity, gender confusion. For parents to say, "Oh, so you think, Johnny, you think you're really a girl? You want to be called Jill? Oh, yeah, we'll call you Jill." No, that's putting him down a path of death and destruction statistically. So the fact that Oregon is so twisted that they're openly and blatantly just writing off people of faith to be able to be foster parents or even to adopt to the state is outrageous. We're suing there. It's also happening in Washington State. Other blue states across the country are engaging in similar just treacherous acts and disrespect of parental rights.
Wow. So many of these issues are coming up lately, and you touch on sort of gender dysphoria and transitioning and what's happening with sort of a replacement of authority in children's lives, right? So they're going to school and getting influences there, getting influences with their peers or somewhere in their community through social media. And instead of the parent being the authoritative figure, now we're starting to see a trend and a push for teachers or school administrators or the medical community to have that authority. So are you seeing that trend, Brad? And what should parents be looking out for now that that's happening more frequently?
Yeah, in particular, it's happening with parents who have their children enrolled in government schools, public education. And the reason is, I'll just give you, here's a classic example. Here's a case we had. It's parents, they love their child. It's a girl. She's in her early teens. She tells a friend of hers in her public school classroom that she thinks she really may be a boy, feels like she's a boy because all that stuff the government schools and the teachers union was teaching him was sort of putting doubt in her mind as whether or not she's really a girl after all. Maybe she really is a boy. So, courtesy of public schools and the indoctrination, the poisonous indoctrination, this girl was having some confused issues. She tells her friend tells the teacher then tells the school counselor calls a social worker then talks to the girl and talks to the parents. And the parents were asked about her, say, well, yeah, we know our daughter is having these issues. We're going to get her counseling. It's good Christian counseling. And we know that, that God's word has answers and that professional counseling can help her deal with her issues. And when they said that, the social worker said, oh, really? And then handed them a warrant and took the child from the parents. And the psychiatrist working with that county agency in Northern California said, we must immediately get guardianship. We must immediately start the process, the transition, quote unquote, process. So this started, we found out the parents contacted us, Pacific Justice Institute, and we stepped in. Of course, we do all our work without charge. We stepped in, we went into court, we got it halted. So there was no injections, no cutting on her body. We got it halted. We litigated and we fought the state of California, and we fought for 2 years.
Wow.
She was kept from her family. Finally, and some terrible things happened I can't get into. Some terrible things because of where she was placed, which is not unusual, unfortunately, with the state and some of these group homes. But we were able to get her back to her parents unscathed, non-injected. And in the last court hearing, she said to the judge, she says, Your Honor, also, I just want you to know that, I not only do I want to go back to my parents, because she wanted to be with her family the whole time anyway.
Oh, wow.
The government was the one saying, oh, no, we know what's best.
Wow. That's shocking.
It's sick. It's demented. It's sadistic. That is what's governing social worker agencies, not just throughout the state of California, but really throughout the country. This is the mindset. The LGBTQ movement has taken over social services throughout the country. There's some exceptions. We get calls from social workers who are Christians, who have conscience, and they're just bewildered. They feel outnumbered, under attack. We try to help them. But this girl made it clear to the judge that she wanted to not only go home, but she also said, and you know what, Your Honor? Also, I really don't feel like I'm a boy after all. I don't think I want to change to be a boy anyway.
Oh, Brad,
if we not stepped in, Kyle, she would have been permanently sterilized, body parts cut off. It would have been tragic. And so many of them, a large percentage of them at a much higher level are likely to commit suicide and have chronic depression, even bipolar issues following this terrible, terrible path.
You're so right that the suicide rate amongst people who have transitioned, completed suicide rate is 19 times higher. And we're seeing generations, Gen Z particularly, some millennials, the depression rates, the rates of anxiety, just general difficulty that these kids are having in life, combined with the fact that they're still growing during this time. Their brains are still developing. This is child development 101. You've got to give them the appropriate wraparound support and resources, and that ain't it. And let me ask you a question. This is going to be a dumb question, but I'm not a lawyer. I'll just play one TV. Was it legal? I know you fought this for 2 years. Was it legal for that social worker to get a warrant because of the way that they operate and their authority, right? So a social worker goes and interviews a child and deems that there's child abuse going on, right? There are physical expressions of child abuse going on. The child reports it. So the social worker goes and has a warrant issued and removes a child. But this is being categorized, right, as child abuse with a family that wants to get a child counseling because the child's got gender confusion in the moment or whatever's going on. They're just expressing some thoughts and some feelings. And the family says, okay, we hear it, we recognize it. We're a family of faith. We're going to get Christian-based counseling. But does the social worker have that authority to remove a child, and a child who's saying she doesn't want to be removed from her family? What's the legality of that there?
Right. So the government has to show that there is a reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect taking place. That's the standard, right? Now, the abuse or neglect can be physical abuse. It can also be emotional abuse or neglect in some states like California. And then California has specifically expanded that to include emotional abuse to be parents not affirming a child's sexual orientation, lifestyles, or gender identity differences. And they must promote the gender distortion. In fact, I like to use the word gender distortion because in reality, I think this is an important note. So it's a little bit of a rabbit trail, but in reality, you really can't change someone's gender. That's really a misnomer. So like every cell in your body is unanimous as to what your gender is. That will not change. In addition, your muscle, skeletal structure, it's either male or female. That won't change. The brain, neurologically, is either decisively male or female. It's either dominant on the left side or the right side. It either has a ratio of white to gray matter, more white matter than gray, versus the other gender, which is more gray matter. So there's so much intertwined neurologically in terms of the function of the organs of the body. You really can't change a gender. You can distort it. And that is what we're talking about when we're dealing with this issue. Also, it's very fluid. The average child, if just left alone, that has gender dysphoria, confusion, the overall majority of them will grow out of it by the time they graduate from high school if they're left alone. That's not what's happening in our public schools. And so there's a tremendous breadth of abuse that can take place under existing laws in most states. Now, some states like Texas and Oklahoma and others are passing laws that we at Pacific Justice Institute have authored, that we have provided through our Center for Public Policy, that gives parents much more due process protection so they can't have their child so easily taken and gives them a right to a jury of their peers and things like that. We need to have that nationwide. And nationwide, that's not going to happen federally unless there's some clear, decisive changes in Congress and the White House after this November election.
Right. You're so right. And I'm glad that you're bringing up this point of the differences between genders. We've just really dug into this issue and looked at what the scientific data says, because isn't that what we've been told to follow? Follow the science, look at the data.
Right.
What does it say? But apparently we don't want to look at this data, because what it says is sex is not immutable. You cannot take someone of one gender and change that person into the other gender. It is not possible. But what's happening, and I really want your thoughts here, because you're coming at this from making the case. You're making the legal case and setting the precedent, which I think is probably the only way that this is, some of these things are going to get stopped. Because what's happening is the people that want to see this happen, they want to see children removed if they're not being affirmed in their distortion, or everyone toe this line that any child or adult who wants to change genders should be absolutely free to do so. The problem is, in this circumstance, we're seeing what's happening on the back end, and it's really bad. The suicide, right, the depression, that, people changing their minds and not being able to undo the physical damage and emotional and mental, but the physical damage that has been done. But they are not relying on what science tells us here, biological science is telling us. Do you think this is a situation in which you are just going to have to litigate it in order to give parents and to give families and people in general the legal protection, right? The actual basis upon which to be protected here?
Right. We are litigating, definitely. And I just gave you an example of just one case.
Yeah.
Many other cases I could tell you about, but this is an ongoing battle in the courts, arguing that it is not abuse or neglect for parents to say, we're not going to let our child be injected with hormones that are not accepting to the body, that are distorting the body. We're not going to agree to masochism, cutting off body parts from our child because of a mental issue that could be very likely going to be temporary. It is absolutely irresponsible for any parent to sign off on that. And yet that's the standard that's being required and justifying taking children. Now, I think it's important to note that these hormones are showing themselves to have terrible patterns. So, for example, with males that are getting the female hormones injected into them, about the first year or two, they'll feel sort of at ease, sort of happy, sort of melancholy, But what happens, though, after about the first year or two, then it changes into depression and mental confusion. And I talked to a leader in the transgender movement for quite a while, and he told me he's taking female injections, so he personifies himself as a female. But even he acknowledged that every day he gets up, he has mental anguish, mental pain, confusion. He said, he doesn't regret doing it, having the procedure, but he says he doesn't recommend it to anyone unless it's the absolute last resort.
Wow.
So we have depression coming in heavy and mental confusion on the male side. On the female side, it's even more dangerous to society, because there you're suddenly increasing their testosterone level, which is an aggressive hormone, by 1,000%, tenfold. Suddenly, the female body is not made for that.
No.
And the brain is not made for that. It's getting lots of this aggressive hormone. That's why boys fight a lot more than girls do, especially in junior high. It's got this, and they don't know what to do with it. Their brains are not fully developing, and they get in more fights. They're frustrated. Well, the same thing happens with the females. And one of the reasons why, in particular, the female is because the male brain has a lot of white matter versus gray matter. White matter allows it to compartmentalize and ideally stay in control. It helps keep that aggressive nature, that aggressive testosterone nature in check. The female does not have that white matter. It has a much higher gray matter ratio, and that's why they can engage partly in multi-level thinking, have several thoughts going on at one time. They're much more perceptive, sensitive, but they don't have the white matter. So when you put all this aggressive testosterone in, they don't have the same control factors. And I believe that's one reason why we had the terrible thing that happened by the female who was on male hormones, testosterone, to distort her body. She went into a private school, Christian school, and shot and killed other children. Had she not had those heavy testosterone injections, I have no doubt that she would not have likely done what she did. And this is just an indicator, I believe, of what's to come.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. Thank you for breaking down the science of this, because in the medical community, all of this has got to be weighed. They take an oath. Doctors take an oath to, do no harm to their patients. And when you look at the science of what you're trying to accomplish, you're trying to accomplish something that is medically not possible and that has tremendous ramifications, lifelong, ramifications for the person's physical body. It's incredible that it's happening. I'm hearing that a lot of these clinics are opening up. There are over 300 clinics now that are specializing in these transitioning surgeries and doing this. And it just sounds so unethical and dangerous. It just sounds dangerous. And I just personally don't understand why anyone in the medical community, let alone other communities, is participating in this when we are seeing a lot of negativity and a lot of really harmful things come out on the other side. But I digress. I'm just so glad that you are so well versed in this. Boy, you're definitely an attorney, and glad that you're the one making the case to protect these kids and these families. And I know PJI also does a lot of religious freedom cases and others. And people should really know, this is so important. Some of what you do best is you provide resources for people. And on your website, pji.org, I've gone several times. There are outstanding resources there. Again, everything is free and available. So I really encourage people to go support the incredible work that you're doing and take advantage of those resources. Brad, I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit. Also, I kind of want to, let's have a segment called Brad Predicts the Future. I think that maybe we need to start doing this. I don't know, incorporate that on your show too. A lot is going on that appears to be very lawless, right?
Right.
We're seeing people from other countries flood by the thousands across our southern border on a daily basis. A sitting president who has the ability to change that all by himself, who won't even speak about it. And when he does speak about it, it's someone else's responsibility, or he's not sure if he has the authority to do it. We're seeing rampant anti-Semitism expressed and exploding in our country. We're seeing the government cross lines left and right to take control and aggress against people's constitutional rights and freedoms. there is a lot going on. Somebody can make the case that the IRS is, just by the sheer fact that it exists and it does what it does to us all the time, that's an aggression against the American people. And we're seeing what's happening to a former president. There is unprecedented legal embattlement of a former president like we have never seen before. You see this, you deal with this and understand it day in and day out better than anybody. What is going on and where do you see all of this going? Because we're at a crossroads, right? We're coming up against a presidential election. It's not like we have two presidential candidates both saying, hey, we see that there are these issues and these problems in the country. And elect me and I'm going to get on it. We're going to make it right. We're going to fix it. You have a president saying, everything's fine. Look over here at what I'm doing for climate change. And, sometimes I'm just like, what are you thinking? Because what he's doing is just so far off track from what needs to be done in our country. And you've got this nation full of people screaming into the wind, like, please help us. We can't afford to pay our mortgage. Our kids are depressed. We don't know what's going on in the schools. So much is happening out of our control. You've got a president saying, everything's fine. Look over here. And a former president saying, re-elect me and I am going to get on this. I mean, where do we go is my question. Where do you see this going and what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, on several points here. So let's talk about the border first. It's going to probably continue to be a problem. Biden may try to somehow stop it before the election and say, see, it's all taken care of. It's no longer an issue. But it will still be an issue because we have millions now in the United States. A portion of them are terrorists, Islamic extremists planted by Iran. We also have people that we know based on what the FBI has reported. We have terrorists planted probably by China and other hostile countries right now. So we have a real threat not only to deal with the halting of this travesty, which is also causing 70 to 80,000 of our Americans to die from fentanyl poisoning. That could have been prevented. So that first step is getting it halted. But the second step is finding them and getting them all removed, the same way that Eisenhower addressed the issue back when he was president in the 1950s. We need to take the same clear effort to have these people removed. You have to have a strong president with a real backbone that can do that. And there's only one on the ballot, as far as I'm concerned, this November, that will have that kind of stamina. And that's not the one sitting in the White House presently. The other thing I think we're going to see happen is dealing with the courts. Eventually, first off, as far as those hideous, bogus lawsuits that were filed against President Trump, they're all going to end up one way or the other dissolved, either at the lower court level, which is less likely because it's stacked. 3 out of 4 of them are stacked with very biased, politicized judges that do not like Trump, and their record shows it. But also they have juries that are very stacked against the president, even though the case in New York is going terribly for the prosecution. All it takes is for the judge to say in the jury instruction, if you find that there's both personal and election reasons for why this money was expended for this purpose, then you have to find him guilty. Well, that's an inaccurate usage of a law. The accurate usage of a law would say if there were personal reasons, if there were election-related reasons, but if there are personal reasons justifiable, then this is not a guilty conviction.
Right.
You must show that the reason was given was decisively for election purposes. The judge will not probably say that. Now, it'll be corrected on appeal.
Sure. But what does that matter? That doesn't matter. That's going to be
after the election.
Yeah. So, and they know that. It's so strategic. I'm glad we're talking about the Trump cases because this is our politically extra moment of the episode. Right. So we're on Politically Basic, and we love to have a politically extra moment in each episode where we highlight somebody who is just extra. And that moment this week, it's got to be everyone involved in what is going on in that New York courtroom with the business records trial that Trump is going through. And I love your perspective on this. I like to talk about, the Trump cases with you, Brad, because you just absolutely nail it every time. Your insight into what is really going on behind the scenes and not what we're getting so much from mainstream media. It's just so spot on. But I don't think people realize too that, DA Bragg, who is the one bringing this forward, he's taking it from, who was it? DA Vance, who was his predecessor in New York, who didn't want to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole because he said, there's no case here, so I'm not going to take it. DA Bragg comes along after him, takes over, and he's like, yeah, I got it. I'm going to run with this. It's so political. And I think people across the nation see what's going on here is that they're going to try to nail him one way or another. You've got a judge who should have recused himself minute one. So when you're talking about what jury instruction is going to be, who knows? I just think there's already an ultimate goal in place. And we are, really running roughshod over the law to get there. Because you're right, they don't care if it gets appealed. That does not matter. They have one goal in mind, which is get a guilty verdict and a conviction and maybe some jail time before November 5th, before Election Day.
Yeah, as far as the New York case goes, we could have a hung jury because the prosecution is doing such a terrible job. Their star witnesses are giving acknowledgments to arguments from the defense and cross-examination. So it's a bogus case in terms of the law, but it's also unfolding to be a bogus case in terms of the facts. As far as, Mr. Smith goes, he it is his case in dealing with, the issue of immunity versus partial immunity and the documents. I think that we're going, the January 6th event and all that. I'm convinced that the Supreme Court is definitely going to narrow the lower court's opinion. It's going to greatly weaken his ability to even continue the case. There's a way he can do it under going a different route, but it's going to be a much, much weaker case. The one in Georgia, Miss Fannie, she's...
I love Fani Willis. I don't want her rewarded for her despicable behavior. But part of me selfishly really wants her to be on like a reality show because it's so insane that she has the position that she has and she just keeps on trucking. She's like, if it's a G, it's a G. And then here we go. And like, she just is so unaware that this is like super problematic for her.
Yeah. And she's using racism. She appeared before a black church and just said, this is all racism. This is racism. Well, no, it's perjury. It's you lying under oath and the prosecutor lying under oath. Yeah. And you engaging in adultery and lying about it, and then taking large amounts of money and giving it to your sleep guy and
her paramour. The sleep guy. I like that.
Yeah, so
this is my sleep guy. Yeah, she's incredible. She is truly incredible. I think that she'll be studied in law schools for many years to come. But you're right. These lawsuits, these cases are just each one, they just kind of crumble as they go along. They fall apart, but they just keep coming. What effect does this have legally and on everyday citizens, Brad? Does what's happening in any of these Trump cases, are these things that we need to worry about?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because it's so important for people to understand. This isn't really just about Trump. What we're seeing is an opening up of district attorneys now. It's in states across the country with examples of how they can use their power for lawfare, we call it, where if someone's running for office, let's say someone's running for a school board in Orange County, California, they're running for a school board. Well, with this as a model, let's say that the district attorney is of a different political party, different political persuasion. They could say, aha, I'll target this person, or they're running for Congress. I'll find a way to sue this person. I'll give them a little mud on their face in the process. It'll sway the voters 5, 10%. I'll cause that person to lose. Not only that, I can hurt their business. I can drain them for money because they're going to have to spend a lot of money with criminal defense attorneys. And of course, the prosecution's using tax dollars. Can we see this happening? Well, actually, we are already seeing it happening in other states. This is very alarming when someone has to ask the question, do I want to run for office because of the political majority of this state or this district attorney is different than mine? It's too risky. It's too dangerous. I better move to a state that's friendly to me. Wow. And this is something like we would have seen when we had countries in the banana republics, someone leaving Honduras and moving to Nicaragua or something like that because of fear of being oppressed, because their ideology or policies were different than those in power. That is what we're facing in the United States. It's a cheapening of our legal system. Now, President Trump did a great job with federal court appointments. Fantastic job. We have the best federal judges in my lifetime. But we're talking with these cases about Trump are dealing basically with state court judges. These are elected by local people in the local communities.
And New York is so friendly to Donald Trump. You would think they would be. I mean, he's done so much for that community and that city, but boy, they are not fans. What was it, like 92% or something voted against him? So he's really in the lion's den in there.
Right. And we're looking at a lack of character, too, by many people in America willing to think, well, the ends justify the means. Does the average American today, when they swear to uphold the law and be fair, et cetera, does that person respect the oath today as it was respected, say, in the 1950s? Unfortunately, I would say no, partly because of the indoctrination they get in public schools and public universities, where they say might is right. If you can rationalize it, it's okay. What may be true for you may not be true to me, et cetera. So we have even a mindset that is more vulnerable for corruption and difficulty in providing a fair and neutral jury for criminal cases, especially when you're dealing with something with such a strong political edge to it as these cases have. So I'm very concerned about that. But then you couple that with the heavy bias of where the jurors are coming from. You know, it's really difficult to think that that President Trump is going to get a fair trial. His attorneys have to work twice as hard and have to be twice as persuasive to overcome a bias, very controversial judges, and then, of course, a biased jury as well. But the New York case, I think we could get a hung jury in that one because the prosecution is doing such a terrible job. It may not even have to go up on appeal as an issue of law. It may be muted as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen there. I mean, it's a circus. The cast of characters in there too. You know, the prosecution is bringing in people who have been accused and convicted of perjury, and you have people who are not credible and they are helping the defense. It's really interesting to see what's going on, but we'll keep close eyes on that. You know, Brad, there's a lot of bad news, but there's good news too. And I'd love to hear from you as we're wrapping up here today. And there's so much to talk to you about. I'm definitely going to have you back, and I hope that you can come back so that we can keep digging into a lot of these issues. But I want to leave listeners and viewers with some of the good news. What would you tell folks are the best things that they can be doing right now to be protecting themselves and making sure that their rights are respected and protected, particularly with regard to parents and parental rights? What would you tell them?
Well, first off, we know many people are leaving blue states and moving to red states, leaving California and New York and moving to Texas and Florida. But for many people, that's not a viable option, and it's also not their calling, if you will. They want to make a difference where they are, particularly in blue states. So I would say, for those people who, even if they could manage to move to a quote safe state, they're really not safe, not with regard to social service agencies, et cetera. So on our website, we've got great resources to empower everyone in this country. So we have, for example, top of the list is an article, 12 Steps to Protect Your Children from Being Taken by CPS or social workers. Every family in America should have that. All of our resources are free. They can download it for free straight from our website, pji.org. If someone listening to this has kids or they have grandkids, they need to download this, because when a social worker knocks on the door or calls, it's then too late. They need to know what to do when that happens. Otherwise, they could lose their child for permanently very easily. Another great resource we have is dealing with these college campus issues. A lot of students, who are not pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist, pro-jihad, they don't know what their rights are. Well, we've got a great resource. It's called the Constitution on Campus. Those students can download that information. It's very helpful. And then people who have their children in public schools, or they just want to make a difference for those in public schools, we have a very empowering book called Reclaim Your School: Steps to Practically and Legally Evangelize Your School. Reclaim Your School. All this it's a free book, downloadable from our website, pji.org. The good news, we still have a constitution. We have a great Supreme Court that's moving in the right direction on religious freedom, parents' rights, the sanctity of life. Oftentimes, all we have to do is step up to the plate. And that's why we have more offices coast to coast, handling more cases, over 220 in active litigation, than any other organization of our kind. And we're growing, and we're going to continue to do our work to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road.
Well, we love it. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I'm going to add, in addition to checking out those resources, to vote. One of the best things that we can do to protect ourselves and our families is vote. We've heard a lot of people expressing their confusion in the last several months about what to do, or maybe they're just not going to deal with it. It's too stressful. But voting means so much more than just installing a president in the White House. Yeah, this is a person who will put an administration full of people in place who have tremendous effect on our nation and across the globe. They appoint justices. They appoint, so many positions of power and influence over what happens to us, little old us, on a day-to-day basis. So go to pji.org. Check all that out. So please support the work of Pacific Justice. You guys are doing amazing. Don't forget to fulfill your civic duty and vote. And Brad, I'm definitely going to have you back on. So much more to talk about. We didn't even scratch the surface on Church Finds Its Voice, but I hope you guys will take a look on the website about what PJI is doing to empower the voice of the church and strengthen our faith leaders and our congregations too. So I thank you, friend, for being here with me today and digging into some of these issues. We need it. Boy, we need more of it. So I can't wait to have you back. And that's it for, go ahead, Brad. That's it for Politically Basic on this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you're following us at Politically Basic and at Being Kyle Campbell on socials, and go to our website, politicallybasic.com, so you can keep up to date. We're going to add resources there, links to get you to the right places, and you can hear these episodes as soon as they drop. Thanks for being with me, and I'll see you next time.